On this prequel episode, we have fan reaction for Dolan's Cadillac. We're learning about the problematic side of Stephenie Meyer and previewing Twilight Saga: Breaking Dawn.
I like how you said the problematic side as if there's a non-problematic side.
Hello and welcome back to This Film Is Lit, the podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. Prequel, Before the Finish Line, the last prequel. That's not true. We decided we're going to do one more kind of mini prequel.
We're going to do like an in-between-isode.
So if you're listening to this, we're going to do next Wednesday is our Breaking Dawn Part 1 movie discussion breakdown. And then the Wednesday after that is Part 2. We're not going to put a whole 2 weeks in between the movies. It's the same thing we did with Harry Potter, I believe.
Yes.
Back in the day. But we are going to do a short prequel episode that'll probably release on like Saturday or Sunday or something like that, where we're going to do fan reaction and stuff to Part 1, and we're going to preview the second movie, but we won't have...
we won't have a learning things.
We won't have a book preview.
Yeah, there's no point in previewing the book twice.
So it'll be a slightly shorter, but and it'll come out in between when a normal episode would come out. So that's what we're going to do for that. But on this episode, we have some new patrons. First things first. First up, we have 3 new patrons since our last prequel episode. We appreciate you very much. All at the $5 level. We're getting access to our bonus content. I believe probably a lot of these people came to check out Midnight Sun review and discussion, which is out now if you are a $5 and above patron. And we still may release something of that for non-patrons. We're still discussing and trying to figure out what we want to do there. Probably not the whole thing. We don't know yet. We're trying to figure that out. But our new patrons at the Hugo Award-winning level are Shadow Shroom. Great name.
Great name.
Tarn Somerville Fletcher. And I had to Google this because it is in Russian. I thought Alina Doletkolova was tough. This one is Maria Meshkova, which sounds not too difficult, right, when I say that, but the way it's written is in actual Russian on Patreon, so I had to copy and paste it into Google Translate, and this is what Google Translate told me this name sounds like in English. I don't know if it's accurate. Let us know. It says Maria, Mariya, and then Meshkova, Meshkova. But the letters in Russian looked like Mapner Mukoba, but I have assumed that it was not a W. It's a letter that looks kind of like a W that I assume is like a Russian.
We don't have in our alphabet.
That, based on what it translates to, must not be some sort of SH sound, it would seem. But it kind of looks like a W. And then the P looking letter PNR must be, near. Marie, near, I don't know. I have no idea. It was interesting.
We don't know.
I put it into Google Translate, and I was not sure what to expect, and it was like Maria, and I was like, that's not, all right. It's not what I was expecting based on those letters in the first name, but I don't know Russian. So we appreciate you very much. Thank you for supporting us. And as always, we have our Academy Award-winning patrons, and they are Winchesters Never Die, Kelly Napier, Gray Hightower, Dory, Eli Youngs, Gratch, Just Gratch, Shelby says Black Lives and Trans Lives Matter. Trans Lives, yes. I always want to add or subtract an S from that. It is.
Trans Lives
Matter. Yeah, it's something about that makes my brain like not work correctly. Supernatural is good, but it's not really worth all the time required. Kind of what I figured, but I appreciate your take on it. And finally, as always, Alina Doletkolova. Thank you all so very much for supporting us at the Academy Award-winning level. If you are new here, if you support us at the $15 a month level, you get priority recommendations, which is why we did Dolan's Cadillac recently. And we have a lot more planned out for the coming months. Almost one a month?
Yeah.
Ish, in that ballpark.
We have several requests in right now, so we're kind of trying to
work through them.
Work through those and get to what people have requested.
Yeah. And we got them kind of spaced out over the coming months, so you can look for it before the end of the year. We have it like 2 or 3 more, I think.
A few
something
more,
like that, in that ballpark. So that's what you get when you support us at the $15 level. So yeah, thank you all very much for that. Let's go ahead and talk about what people had to say about Dolan's Cadillac.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
So we didn't get tons of feedback, which I was kind of expecting. This is a lesser known King property.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed like the movie, like you said, it was like a direct to DVD.
Direct to video release. Didn't get a theatrical release. Low budget. It had some names in it, but not huge names or anything like that. So yeah.
So on Facebook, we had 3 votes. All of them were for the book. No comments on Facebook. Nobody weighed in. On Twitter, we had 7 votes. 6 of them were for the book and 1 for the movie. But whoever decided to vote for the movie was not brave enough to defend their stance.
Calling you out. Tell us why in the world. I mean, you could have a reason. We just want to hear it. So
yeah, I mean, I'm curious to know why someone would prefer the movie. But we did have a couple comments. One from Matt Nelson at Matt W. Nelson, who said, haven't seen the movie except for clips, but I could tell it definitely was not a quality experience. I mean, I don't know what about our conversation gave you that idea, Matt, but...
Yes, may or may not have been the case.
And then we had quite a bit of feedback from Shelby at Shelby Suderman.
As we would expect, since this was the movie she recommended.
Yes, this Shelby is an Academy Award winner patron, and she put in this request for Dolan's Cadillac. We said, okay.
She did it specifically because she said it's like her favorite Stephen King short story.
Yeah, one of her favorite King King stories. Yeah. But I think she had not seen the movie either until we were going to do it. Nope. So
she just knew. She's also a fan of Good, Bad, or Bad, I believe. So that wouldn't, there were a little bit of that in there.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
So here's what Shelby had to say. What really makes the short story work for me is how grounded it feels compared to typical revenge stories. I think this movie should have taken a page out of the book/movie Rebecca, where the title character is more felt and not seen, with their presence hanging over the protagonist. It's a similar feeling in the story. In a way, Book Dolan feels like the boogeyman. He's an incredibly dangerous person with a lot of power who's managed to keep that power for a long time. He's smart enough to keep track of who'd want him dead, and he's paranoid enough to sense when something isn't right. This makes Robinson's perspective paranoid too, because we never know when he's watching or how much he knows at any moment. The story gives us a David and Goliath scenario and asks, in the real world, without the scenes in typical revenge movies where the characters would have died if they weren't in a movie, how would this everyman type murder a larger-than-life mobster? He can't do anything suspicious, like take up shooting or getting a job at Dolan's favorite restaurant, because it would draw Dolan's notice and he'd just have Robinson killed. Robinson needs something less obvious, and what he comes up with at least feels like it could work. And we did talk about that a little bit in our episode. It does feel like something that's reasonable that could work. Shelby went on to say, for me, Dolan immediately figuring out Robinson is behind the trap shows us that Dolan did, in fact, notice Robinson suddenly taking up an interest in road construction, but either couldn't see how it was a trap or dismissed it as the years passed and nothing else happened. Book Dolan is frightening even when he's scared and caught in a trap. The movie took the unique murder idea, threw out that grounding, and made a very typical revenge story out of it, including the scenes where Dolan could have killed Robinson, but didn't. In short, movie Robinson would have been killed by Book Dolan long before he could try anything, and Book Robinson could have easily killed movie Dolan without resorting to burying him alive. I feel like this could have been adapted into a really intense, paranoid thriller. Maybe bring Sylvester Stallone back to play Dolan and cast Bryan Cranston as Robinson. A movie could expand on the paranoia already present in the story, but I don't think we'll get to see that. And I think that's a good point. I think they could have done something really like cool and kind of psychological with this story.
Yeah, I think this movie done by whatever the guy who wrote Breaking Bad is that's definitely has the right vibe for this kind of film. And yeah, Cranston playing somebody like Robinson makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So yeah, I can see.
I think they could have done something cool with it, but like Shelby said, instead we got like a very typical kind of revenge story movie.
Yeah. Yep.
And then Shelby also said, I also hate that the movie updated what kind of Cadillac it was. So
I assume it was like a
Cadillac DeVille,
which is like a sedan. I believe it's not like a big SUV.
Yeah, in the movie it's like an armored
SUV. Yeah, which makes sense.
I guess it
in the modern
makes
day
sense
it would
in
make
the modern day,
sense.
but
you would have to do more of a period piece, I think, probably for it to make more sense in the movie. But
but then we couldn't have Robinson.
Yeah, you got to have that
talking
moonroof,
out the
sunroof or whatever.
the website address.
Oh, also yes, you need a computer. Obviously, you need a computer and a sunroof. All of these are very important elements. So, all right, that's our feedback for Dolan's Cadillac. We appreciate that very much. Let's go ahead now and learn about why your fave is problematic. Stephenie Meyer edition.
No matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world.
This is obvious. This one's easy.
It's easy,
relatively speaking.
But I want to talk about it because I don't want to ignore it.
No, yeah, definitely not. Oh, we've touched on it throughout the
we
episodes,
have.
Yeah.
We have. But I did want to kind of dedicate a specific segment to discussing this.
Yeah.
And if you are relatively new here, these learning things segments are not really meant to be comprehensive. No. They're overviews. They're intended to be short because these are shorter episodes.
Primers.
That being said, if you feel like there's something that I missed that you would like to talk about, feel free to tweet us. Yeah. And I would be delighted to go on discussing
absolutely
how problematic Stephenie Meyer is.
Yes.
So I have divided this into 3 main segments. First segment, this is one of the biggest and most common criticisms leveled at Twilight, and that is that it is anti-feminist and that it glorifies traditional gender roles.
Yep.
Now, the way that we define and discuss what feminism is has changed a lot since 2005, when the first book came out.
Changed a lot since 2015.
It has. It has.
Yeah.
And we've touched on this throughout the summer series. I think Bella does have some positive qualities. She's clearly smart. She holds her own among characters who clearly outpower her. She knows what she wants, and she negotiates her way to getting it.
She's not a doormat, which you might be led to believe based on what some people would say.
Right,
about
based
the
on
series.
some of the less thought out criticism.
Yeah, just as like if you had never read it, you didn't never seen the movies, you had just heard, you had seen a couple tweets or something, like you might think that she's literally like a complete pushover and just like, completely at the whim of all the men in her life and that sort of thing, and like the super regressive character. And while you're going to get into it, it's not as bad as that.
Right, it's not as bad as that. It's not as black and white as that.
Yeah.
But still, I wouldn't go so far as to call this a feminist story, nor would I say that Bella is a good or really even okay role model. Have you noticed, as we've been reading, that with each passing book, we hear less and less of anything about Bella that's removed from either Edward or Jacob?
Yeah.
Because I've really noticed that upon this reread. Like, Twilight Bella was okay. She had her own interests. She had her own goals. But by Breaking Dawn, her interests are really having sex with Edward and becoming a vampire so she can be with Edward forever and also be his equal looks and power-wise.
Yes.
And those things are also her goals.
Yes. Yeah, her character becomes Edward, essentially.
Yeah, essentially.
And her friendship with Jacob to some extent, but basically just Edward, and vice versa.
Yeah. And honestly, I don't think it's a huge stretch to look at that aspect of the story as a particularly unsubtle women should submit to men type of message.
Yeah.
Especially when your primary audience is young girls.
Yeah.
But I think we can also look at a more concrete example of traditional gender roles in Twilight by looking at how Bella primarily spends her time when she's not with Edward, which is largely cleaning the house and cooking for her father.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
I mean, on the morning of her wedding in Breaking Dawn, did you catch this?
No.
The morning of her wedding, she gets up early, cleans, and then makes pancakes
That's
for
right.
Charlie.
Yeah.
On the morning of her wedding.
Yes.
I want someone to feed me breakfast on the morning of my wedding.
If you don't make me pancakes on my wedding morning, wedding's off.
Pre-divorce, preemptive divorce right there. She reads sometimes.
Yeah.
But
sometimes,
like,
but not even since, not really since. No, I guess she didn't in Eclipse because there's a whole Wuthering Heights thing.
A little bit.
But yeah, she reads sometimes.
She reads sometimes.
Sometimes. And since she is our point of view character, because I would say the same thing about Edward, and I've mentioned that in episodes, like he has no notable interests or motivations or goals outside of being with Bella.
Yeah.
But he's also not our point of view character. We're not with him as much.
Right.
As much.
And honestly, I don't know if the problem is more of she wants to put an emphasis on these traditional gender roles, or maybe she just, like Stephenie Meyer, just like lacks the imagination not to, or maybe she's just bad at developing characters.
I think it's a little bit of all of it. I get the vibe from a lot of, not everything, and we're going to get to some of the other ones here eventually. I think the religious angles, particularly, maybe a more conscious thing. But I think with these gender role things, I don't think this, because I've talked about how I would imagine that Stephenie Meyer would probably say she is a feminist of some sort.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of this isn't like conscious or intentional. I think it's a lot of it is just like her upbringing and what she
is writing what she knows.
She's writing what she knows, and so her characters turn out as sort of very trad wife like archetypes. And it and I don't think it's necessarily like a conscious choice to make them that way versus just like writing what she knows. Yeah, it would be my guess. I don't know for sure, but
I think she's writing what she knows, and I do just think she's not a particularly good writer.
Yeah.
Like
yes.
there are things that I think she can do reasonably well, but overall, would I say she's a good writer? No.
No.
And while we're here on the subject of like gender roles and all that jazz, I just want to point out that the LGBT plus community seemingly just does not exist.
No.
In Meyer's fictional world.
Yeah. There's one reference in Breaking Dawn that I've seen.
Is there?
There's not to any character being part of that community, but a joke at the expense of one of the characters potentially being part of that. So somebody makes it, and I wrote a note about it in because I'm a couple hundred pages into Breaking Dawn.
I'm not as far in as you.
Let's see if I can find it real quick.
And I have like no memory of this book except for like the big plot points.
Yeah, hold on. Jacob jokes that Quill might. So Quill's talking about, because Quill has imprinted on Rachel. Somebody. Mm-hmm. There's so many new characters. Like all of a sudden, Jacob has a sister. I was like, well, okay, great. But Quill has imprinted on somebody. It's the little girl. It's the 2-year-old or whatever. And Jacob makes a joke about, he goes, well, other girls just don't catch my eye anymore since I imprinted on her or whatever. Mm-hmm. And Jacob makes a joke about, oh, maybe to try going out with guys or something. Like he makes a joke like, oh, girls don't catch your eye, but you know, you could go on dates with dudes or so. Like There's like a weird throwaway joke that's, and again, I'm just saying that this is like the only like overt reference to even to non-cis hetero people even existing in this universe. So
I thought about trying to make this its own point, but I was like, there's like not really anything to unpack or go into detail about, because that element literally just isn't there.
And there are interesting, probably deconstructions and analysis of this text through a queer lens.
Oh yeah,
and I talked a little bit about it. Some of what I got about sort of Jacob and his eventual transformation and becoming a werewolf, and that you could potentially read that through a like a gay coding like lens type of thing. But yeah, so there's stuff out there. There's probably media out there to digest in that regard. But yeah, in the text, there's just nothing.
Like within the text, there's not, aside from like apparently this one tasteless joke.
Yeah.
There aren't any characters that we know of that are on.
No. No. Alice and Bella, but Stephenie Meyer doesn't realize.
Headcanons
she just doesn't
only.
realize.
Maybe. So then I think that is a nice segue into my second category, which is the religious agenda, which is another thing that has been discussed quite a bit.
Yes.
So the Twilight books don't mention religion specifically. But Meyer's Mormon faith still very clearly informs her work, and she has said as much herself. She's stated in interviews that the Book of Mormon was the book with the most significant impact on my life. She's also stated, unconsciously, I put a lot of my basic beliefs into the story, free agency as a big theme, as is sacrifice. Now, some of this I think is kind of subtle and not necessarily harmful. Subtle if you're not familiar with Mormonism, which I would grant that a lot of people reading the books probably aren't.
No.
For example, Mormonism teaches a belief in eternal families and eternal marriage, the idea that families can be sealed to one another so that they remain together forever, even after death. In a story about eternal vampires who are bonded together as family, it's not really hard to see the inspiration there.
Yeah.
Harmful, probably.
And there's also
not.
even just this sort of generic allusions, which you don't have here, to like the Carlisle and her discuss God at one point and their soul, and sort of that's a very common vampire story sort of element, regardless, is sort of vampires and whether or not, are they damned forever because and sort of discussing their immortal souls and what happens to them when they die and whether or not God exists in a universe with vampires. Like that's because that's touched on a little bit,
but that's a fairly common vampire story trope anyway. But there are more clear examples of kind of typical religious agenda on display. For example, Edward's insistence on abstinence, waiting until they're married to have sex, lest they run the risk of endangering Bella's soul. Now, maybe you jive with that and maybe you don't.
Yeah.
Personally. But we live in a society.
Oh, really?
And when
this is the first I'm hearing of this society.
Boy, do we live in a society. But my point is, when the larger context is a world in which abstinence-based sex education results in higher rates of both unplanned pregnancies and STIs, it's pretty dismaying to see that thought process pushed from something that was so popular with teenage girls.
And this is one that feels, unlike, as I mentioned earlier, sort of just the gender role type thing that felt sort of unconscious. This feels
purposeful.
These religious ones feel very intentional.
Yeah.
They feel like very clear choices to push a moral framework and basically present a thesis of like, this is good.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then there's the big example,
which that alone isn't necessarily a bad thing to do in your story. I don't have a problem with authors putting a message in their story, but I just disagree. We disagree with the message.
Right. So, we disagree with the message. And then there's the larger context of the world.
The harm that message does. Yes. Yeah.
So then there's the big example, right? Bella's pregnancy.
Yeah.
And her insistence on continuing it despite the fact that it is very literally killing her.
Literally killing
very
her.
literal. It's not subtle, folks.
No.
It's not subtle. Now, I think it's important to note here that Mormonism does allow abortion in instances where the mother's life is in danger. Bella chooses to continue the pregnancy, which is where you could theoretically come in with a counter argument, right? Well, she chose. Yeah. It was her choice.
Yeah,
and
that is her choice, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Yes, sure.
But again, we live in a society.
Yeah.
And the context of that society is one that is constantly seeking to remove that choice from women, most frequently through messaging that insists on the sanctity of life while ignoring that the mother's life is still very much a life.
Yes.
The message that Bella is doing the right thing by sacrificing herself in order to give birth is, again, pretty bleak in the greater context of the world around us. Mm-hmm. Meyer has stated that Bella's pregnancy and childbirth were, for her, a way to kind of explore that concept of what childbirth used to be in the past. Now, I was not able to access this full interview, so I can't provide more context, but woof.
Yeah.
Maybe this isn't what Meyer meant, but I can't ignore the connection between Bella dying while giving birth and childbirth being historically one of the most frequent causes of death for women. And then to top that off, that connection off with the fact that the story very much portrays this as Bella making the right decision, the good decision, the moral decision.
Yeah.
That's a yikes for me.
Yeah, and on top of that, it also it once again it reinforces the idea that not only does it have this messaging about abortion and it very clearly being saying the message of this of Bella's pregnancy is that it's worth the mother giving up her life to give birth to this child. It also over having an abortion, which is one of the options offered in the book. Basically, Carlisle and them, they're like, they want to give her an abortion, basically, so that she won't die from this child or this child that's in her. But apart from that, the whole question of abortion is the importance and the value that sort of, and this to me feels less conscious as opposed to the very overt, like, conscious anti-abortion message, is the value it places on women as on people who can give birth to children as that being the thing that of value that they should value, that is necessarily of value.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It puts an extra amount of value on the idea of giving birth in general. And that's sort of inherent within a pro-life message in general. They kind of tend to go hand in hand. But I think that is just sort of a more subtle and still problematic point of view, is that idea that because it's not something that Bella has ever wanted, then all of a sudden it's just instantly it becomes this like all-consuming,
it becomes her purpose.
Yeah, and
right. Whereas prior to her getting pregnant, they have this conversation in the book, and she's kind of put up against characters like Rosalie or like Esme, who wanted to have children but now can't because they are vampires. Yeah. And Bella is always like, I'm not worried about it. Yeah. I don't want that. I don't care.
Yeah, I don't care. But then very quickly, all of a sudden, she does care.
All of a sudden, that is everything.
That is everything. Yeah. Again, placing this massive importance on the ability to give birth as this sort of sacred thing, which for people that that's not to downplay the importance for people that want it and want to do that, or to say that it's not a beautiful thing for people that want that or whatever, you know what I mean? But like the change in her character so suddenly does imply this sort of strange, like, otherworldly, like it adds a moral weight and a moral like value to it that is, to me, not is problematic, because it's something that society already enforces constantly.
All right, so that brings us to my third and final bullet point here. And this is where we get to some really twisty stuff. Now, this problematic aspect of Meyer's writing, I think, has been largely overshadowed by the more obvious gender and religion issues that we've already touched on. But I've seen more people talk about it recently.
I've seen more of it lately.
In the wake of Midnight Sun being released, and that is race. Now, the way that Meyer writes about race, again, isn't necessarily surface level, but it also isn't super subtle once you start looking for it. Now, the most obvious cue is in how she describes the vampires. Purely, blindingly white.
Yes.
Marble, alabaster, every single synonym for white that you can possibly think of. And while there are evil and immoral vampire characters, the main vampires, the Cullens, are held up as examples of extreme goodness.
Yeah.
They are so good, they have found a way to defy their very nature through their goodness. Bella often describes them as being like angels, the ultimate symbol of virtue. Now, associating these images capitalizes on a notion that is already entrenched in most readers' minds, that whiteness means goodness.
I think it's also very likely draws from her Mormon, from my minimal understanding of, you don't touch on that, do you? The Mormon. Okay. So there's, from my understanding, that also could very likely tie into, and now Mormonism has a lot of different sects, a lot of different versions of it. And I think in more modern versions, they've sort of divorced from this. But I think traditionally there's the big divide where there's a, like literally all of the evil people were like dark skinned in Mormon, like the Mormon,
like
holy books and mythology. And it was all of the holy people were white people.
I don't know,
and I can't remember. It was like the curse
the curse of. It's not the curse of, Cain.
Cain, Mark of Cain, maybe.
The Mark of Cain.
It was upon them, and that the way it reads in Mormonism. And again, I am going on a very rough memory I have from videos and the stuff I've read years ago, but that may be somewhat of what's feeding into this. Potentially,
it's entirely possible. But so we have that color coding, right, with the vampires, and then we can compare that with Meyer's characters of color who are subject to a similar kind of color coding. Jacob is often described as having dark skin, dark hair, dark eyes. His last name is even Black in a particularly unsubtle move. I don't think that Jacob is meant to represent evil or badness, but if white equals good, then the rest is also pretty simple math.
Yeah.
Sam is an even better example of the black equals bad color coding. If we think about the description of his wolf form, Jacob and the other wolves have brown or red fur, but Sam has dark black fur. In Eclipse, we learn that the wolf's physical appearance is a reflection of what the man inside is like. Quill even says at one point, so that's why Sam is all black. Black heart, black fur.
Is it a spoiler?
Maybe.
Okay. Because I was like, Sam's just the leader and like a dude. I don't know. This feels like a spoiler for me.
I'm sorry.
It's fine.
And this kind of color coding isn't the only racially charged trope that Meyer utilizes throughout her writing. She also uses the very common, very pervasive trope of making her vampires white and associated with aristocracy, while the people of color are werewolves, aka literally dogs.
Yes.
And that is, again, that's not something she invented. That's pretty common in fantasy writing.
Yes. We talked about it a bit with Tolkien and the orcs and and the racializing of different races and the racializing of but the rooting of the racialism in fantasy within real world races.
where characters of color tend to be depicted as like animalistic.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, or even
Less
downright evil
civilized,
sometimes.
yeah.
Or and there was a recent thing where Dungeons and Dragons came out recently and said, okay, orcs don't have to be aligned to evil. Like, as a rule, like, you can make them, orcs can just be, you can have any alignment of orc you want, because we're not buying into the idea that whole races are just evil anymore, which I think is, makes a lot of sense.
Right. And here, with this kind of thing, it's not necessarily that the werewolves are evil. Right.
No.
It maybe in some properties, but not in this one.
No.
It's more of they're associated with being animalistic, with being
primitive,
less civilized, with being primitive.
Yeah.
That's where the ickiness comes in.
Yeah.
Now, these allegations of racism actually get even worse when we start dipping into the movies. Catherine Hardwicke, who directed Twilight, gave an interview in 2018 where she alleged that Meyer fought tooth and nail against a more diverse cast, stating, "And I was like, oh my God, I want the vampires. I want them all. Alice, I wanted her to be Japanese. I had all these ideas, and she just could not accept the Cullens to be more diverse." Now, according to Hardwicke, Meyer was quick to defend her stance by pointing out that she described the vampires as having glistening white skin. So we ended up with the villain, Laurent, being black, as well as a couple of Bella's classmates, minor characters.
Yeah, completely
being
irrelevant
people of color.
characters.
Yeah,
not
even like the main
Mike,
people that she hangs out with.
Yeah. Not that Mike, as a person of color, would be a great representation in her movie, but he might be worse than Laurent, honestly.
I mean, I will say I get Mike as a douchey white guy.
Yeah,
that might be
tracks.
appropriate.
That casting tracks.
Now, I believe some of the Quileute tribe actors are native, but not all of them. Taylor Lautner, in particular has been suspiciously vague about this, he stated that he has distant native ancestry through his mother's side, which is usually white people speak for probably not. Maybe somewhere way back, but probably not. And that brings us then to more recent controversy. With the publication of Midnight Sun, many readers, including yours truly, have returned to the world of Twilight with a more critical and often more educated eye. And a lot of people have been voicing discomfort with the way that Meyer incorporated the Quileute people into her story, calling it exploitative. And it is true that she invented things and then slapped the Quileute name on them. It's also true that she profited from her creations. Now I think the problem with that is that the Quileute are real people.
Yeah, like a few hundred, right?
Yeah,
like 1,000 or something.
They're a fairly small tribe, but they're real. Yeah. They exist.
Yeah.
And at the moment, they are fighting to raise money to move their tribal school and other village fixtures to higher ground as they currently sit in a tsunami zone. Stephenie Meyer is worth approximately $125 million. I can't find any evidence that she's donated a cent their way after profiting off of their name, culture, and traditions.
Even if you're just the most awful person,
right?
It's such an easy
and obvious PR move.
Like, even if you don't have good reasons at all, which is astounding to me, but even if you have no good intentions behind it, even if you just want to make it, like, why would you not toss $10 million? Whatever. Right? I do not understand. It's mind-blowing.
I know. It's chump change to people like this. Yeah, she's not going to miss it.
No. She could literally,
She could probably move their whole entire school herself.
Yeah.
I don't know how much it costs, but she could probably do it.
I would imagine with the money, If she's worth $125 million, obviously a lot of that's not liquid assets, but even still, there's no way that's not completely doable. Yeah.
But I can't find any evidence that she has made any donations to them. I couldn't find any evidence that they received like any kind of proceeds from the Twilight series.
Yeah.
You know,
some of them got invited to the red carpet one time. So that, you know, hey.
So we'll be sharing a link to the Quileute Tribe's Move to Higher Ground information and donation page on our Twitter and Facebook. We will be making a donation, and if you have been listening to and enjoying our Twilight Summer series, or if you have been hating it, we encourage you to do the same.
Stick it to Stephenie Meyer, I guess. I don't know. I don't know if she'd be mad about you donating, but probably not.
I don't think she cares.
Yeah,
She's sitting on $125 million.
She probably wouldn't even care.
And you know what? I'm just glad she's not tweeting about anything.
I would say I was like, in comparison, some of the other authors we've done, if you donated to certain charities, would have some mad, upset things to say about it. We're talking about J.K. Rowling. Go fuck yourself, J.K. Rowling. We're gonna have to add fucking addendums to all of our Harry Potter episodes. Good Christ, that's a whole discussion for another day. Anyways, that's it for our Learning Things segment. That's not all of the ways by any stretch, and we've been, like we said, we've been talking about them during the episodes. We'll have more to say. I have plenty of notes so far.
We'll have plenty to say. I have plenty to say
so far in Breaking Dawn about Stephenie Meyer and the messaging and themes and that sort of stuff.
Can I just get you guys amped for these episodes? The other night we were sitting in bed and we were both reading Breaking Dawn, and out of nowhere, you turned to me and said, "This one is not good."
Yeah, I did. I was about 200 something pages in that ballpark, and not that the other ones have been great by any stretch, but boy, oh boy. And I'm not even that far in yet, but I'm seeing dominoes line up that this is going to be a nightmare. It's really not good so far. So I want to say I'm excited to finish it, but I'm oof.
So get hype, everybody.
Yeah. Speaking of Breaking Dawn, let's go ahead and talk about the book and learn about some book facts.
You ready?
Just don't let me fall, Dad.
Never. I, Edward Cullen, take you, Bella Swan.
For better or for worse.
To love.
To cherish. As long as we both shall live.
This is how I'll remember you. Pink cheeks, heartbeat. I think I'd be used to telling you goodbye by now.
All right, Breaking Dawn, published in 2008. It is the fourth and final novel in the Twilight Saga. It deviates from the previous 3 books in that it is divided into 3 sections, and Bella is not the only narrator. I had to go peek at where you were in the book to make sure this wasn't a big spoiler.
I had gotten past that part, yeah.
Bella narrates sections 1 and 3, while section 2 is narrated by Jacob.
Yeah, I'm like 3 or 4, I don't know. I'm a handful of chapters into the Jacob section, so.
Yeah.
I
remember reading this for the first time and getting to his section and just being like,
that was a surprise.
What the fuck is she on about?
Yeah, that was a surprise. And one of my notes is, boy, I didn't think there was anybody's head I would like to be in less than Edward. Oh no.
It's Jacob.
Oh, it's Jacob.
Shortly after writing Twilight, Meyer wrote a book titled Forever Dawn, which was a direct sequel to Twilight. And that became the basis for Breaking Dawn. The basic storyline remained the same, but Forever Dawn was narrated completely from Bella's point of view. The werewolves and Jacob were only sketchily developed, and Victoria and Laurent were both still alive, obviously. That manuscript, again, then was developed and changed as Meyer wrote New Moon and Eclipse. Meyer has said that she may someday post extras if I ever have time to go back through the Forever Dawn manuscript. It's just as long as Breaking Dawn. So now that she's gotten a taste for dipping her toes back into the Twilight world, I bet we're going to see that fairly soon. I don't know if she'd publish it traditionally because it wouldn't really make sense to, I guess. But my guess is we're going to see some of that start to roll out. So get hype for that, guys. Meyer decided to include the pregnancy in her story while she was researching vampires early in 2003 and came across the legend of the incubus, a demon who could father children. Meyer has said in an interview that the birth scene that was published is a little less grotesque than the one she wrote before editing due to her editor, agent, and the publisher's request to, quote, tone down the violence a little.
All right.
The cover of Breaking Dawn is a metaphor.
I don't remember what it is
because they always are.
I have the book version.
Because you have the book.
You have the movie
tie-in.
It's just Jake or Edward and Bella like hugging.
It's a chessboard.
Oh, okay.
With the white chess piece and the red chess piece in the background.
I do vaguely remember the chessboard.
Yes. Yeah. So it is a metaphor because the covers are always metaphors except for New Moon.
Yeah. What?
It's a metaphor for Bella's progression. Throughout the entire series, she began as the physically weakest player on the board, the pawn, but at the end, she becomes the strongest, the queen. It's all very good and subtle.
Yes.
Breaking Dawn was one of the most anticipated books of 2008. It was probably my most anticipated book of 2008. Mm-hmm. It sold 1.3 million copies in the US and 20,000 copies in the UK in its first 24 hours of release, as well as 100,000 copies in Canada during its first weekend. It debuted at number 1 on USA Today's Top 150 bestsellers list and went on to spend over 58 weeks on that list. Critical reception of Breaking Dawn was mixed.
Can't imagine why.
Kara von Rengel-Kinsey of School Library Journal responded with a positive review, describing the book as captivating, and noting, while this novel is darker and more mature than the earlier titles, Meyer's twists and turns are not out of character. Publishers Weekly stated...
I like to imagine when she says twists and turns, she means in the characters themselves. And that's not out of character for Stephenie Meyer because she doesn't know how to write characters. But anyways, I saw a comment on a video about Eclipse today that made me laugh very hard, and it was one of the things we talked about in the Eclipse episode. The quote was, Stephenie Meyer doesn't write character arcs. She writes character cliff dives. And I was like, yep. That's very accurate.
Publishers Weekly stated that the main problem with Breaking Dawn was that essentially everyone gets everything they want, even if their desires necessitate an about-face in characterization, or the messy introduction of some backstory. Nobody has to renounce anything or suffer more than temporarily. In an article by the Associated Press, journalist Sarah Rose wrote that fans of the series would love engaging characters, great humor, a distracting obsession with beauty, focus on the minutiae of emotions. However, casual readers may be disappointed with a lot of build-up and little action. While The Independent called the book shockingly, tackily, sick-makingly sexist, which is like my favorite quote that I read in every review I looked at. Nonetheless, Breaking Dawn was the recipient of a British Book Award for Children's Book of the Year. Yeah, I don't know. In 2009,
YA fits in that category.
yeah, probably. They probably lump it together. In the 2009 Children's Choice Book Awards, the novel was chosen as Teen Choice Book of the Year, and Meyer won the Author of the Year award.
Wow. She lucked out or either lucked out or on purpose or just by sheer timing. This came out the year after Deathly Hallows. So
yeah, right.
Deathly Hallows was 2007. She would have won none of those awards.
Meyer has stated in regard to ending the series, the Twilight Saga is really Bella's story, and this was the natural place for her story to wind up. She overcame the major obstacles in her path and fought her way to the place she wanted to be. I suppose I could try to prolong her story unnaturally, but it wouldn't be interesting enough to keep me writing. Stories need conflict, and the conflicts that are Bella-centric are resolved. So, at least at some level, she knows that stories need conflict.
Yeah.
I don't know if she knows how to do it.
No, I'm not
but
sure.
But she knows that thing.
Yes. All right, let's go ahead and talk about Breaking Dawn, the movie. Well, sorry, Breaking Dawn Part 1.
I can't see Bella's future anymore.
We don't know what they've bred. We have to protect the tribe before it's too late.
You're the enemy now. Sam won't hesitate. You will be slaughtered. I'm starving you by the hour. I'm the one who loses you.
You have to accept what is.
You've given me no choice!
Get ready. They're coming for Bella. They're not gonna touch her. If you kill her, you kill me! Bella! Come on.
So we're going to talk about Part 2 in the mini little prequel episode that we're going to do in between the two main episodes. So I only have notes about Part 1 right now. Breaking Dawn Part 1 is a 2011 film directed by Bill Condon, who we've had a new director for every movie so far. Bill Condon does do both of the Part 1 and Part 2, but he is now the fourth director in the series. He directed Dreamgirls, Kinsey, Gods and Monsters, and the 2017 Beauty and the Beast. So that's, among other things. He's actually an Academy Award-winning writer. It was written once again by Melissa Rosenberg, who has written every single one of them, and is also known for Jessica Jones and Dexter. And it stars all of our same main cast, plus new people, but I didn't list them all out. The film had a budget of $110 million, and it pulled in a worldwide box office of $712 million. On opening weekend, the movie made $291 million, making it the 10th largest worldwide opening of all time. It is the fourth highest grossing film of 2011 and the 50th highest grossing movie of all time. This film is rated 25% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes and has a 45 out of 100 on Metacritic. Let's recap them all now. Eclipse was 48% fresh and had a 58 on Metacritic. New Moon, 28% fresh and 44 on Metacritic. And Twilight was 49% fresh and 56 on Metacritic, making this the worst reviewed of the franchise thus far. Technically, it has 1 point higher Metacritic score than New Moon, but it's 3% lower on Rotten Tomatoes, so averaging out, it's...
I'm so excited.
It's slightly lower than New Moon, which I still don't necessarily understand. I didn't think New Moon was that bad. I think of the movies, it might be my favorite so far, honestly. But whatever. So whether or not this movie would be split into two was of much discussion. Since under contract for only 4 films, Kristen Stewart, Robert Pattinson, and Taylor Lautner, their status for doing 2, if they split it, was in question. So they were unlikely at first to split it because they were only on contract for 4 films, and obviously they split it, that would be 5 films. Producer Wick Godfrey stated that all 3 main cast members were signed on to one Breaking Dawn film, but eventually all were confirmed for a 5th movie, which I'm assuming was achieved by throwing a buttload of money at them, would be my guess, because they obviously can't recast
One would think.
they can't recast all the main characters.
I would love to know how much money they had to throw at Robert Pattinson.
Yes, that's one of the things. That's one of the things that I thought was interesting, and I assume they had to just throw a buttload of money at him because obviously Robert Pattinson famously not, and I think even Kristen Stewart, like none of them particularly liked these movies, and
but Pattinson most famously,
Pattinson most famously throughout the process, and I think that the fact that they were only under contract for 4 films made it seem very likely that if they wanted them to do a 5th movie, they would have had to just back a dump truck full of money up to their house, which I'm sure they did. In March 2010, it was announced that Summit was searching for an Academy Award-winning nominating directors to helm the project. They had names like, these names are thrown around in the mix, Sofia Coppola, Gus Van Sant, and Bill Condon. All were rumored to have been approached to direct. Reportedly, Robert Pattinson wanted Gus Van Sant. On April 28th of 2010, Summit announced that Bill Condon would direct. These are some great quotes here. Of the film, Condon said, quote, "I'm very excited to get the chance to bring the climax of this saga to life on screen. As fans of the series know, this is a one-of-a-kind book, and we're hoping to create an equally unique cinematic experience." Which is, boy, that's a way to put that. But he does also say, "The very nice folks at Summit, they sent me the novel. I loved it. I quickly imprinted on the material."
I would love to know. He says that they sent him the novel. Do you think that he read the first 3? Or just jumped straight into Breaking Dawn?
Breaking Dawn, yeah, I don't know. That's true. That's interesting. I have no idea. So apparently Robert Pattinson took boat driving lessons so that he could drive the boat to the island, to Isle Esme. Despite taking lessons, supposedly he crashed the boat in both of the lessons and while filming in Brazil. Supposedly.
Are we sure that wasn't sabotage?
Yeah, he may have been doing it on purpose. So for the infamous birth scene, a puppet and a real 3-week-old baby were used. And this is the most disgusting fact I've ever had on this show. Strawberry jam and cream cheese were mixed and used to simulate the aftermath of birth.
Oh, wow. That makes me never want to eat a bagel again.
I love a bagel with cream cheese and jam. It's just the grossest.
That's the grossest thing I've ever heard.
Oh, boy. So I thought this was fascinating. The sex scene between Edward and Bella originally caused the film to receive an R rating by the MPAA. The scene had to be reshot and edited to receive a PG-13 rating. According to interviews, Robert Pattinson and Bill Condon blamed Kristen Stewart's wild, quote, thrusting during filming. Condon said, quote, "Well, I think that's true. Kristen got very into it. I hate to be clinical, but there are guidelines on thrusting intercourse. Not to make people too excited. It was never explicit, but I think any movement that suggested that it is what it... that any movement that suggests that it is what the MPAA object to..." I don't know. I can't parse that last part of the sentence. But anyways, Kristen Stewart later said in an interview that filming Bella and Edward's honeymoon sex scene was hard to do, but she was very happy with the final result. Yeah. It's also hilarious to me. I don't know much about Taylor Lautner, and his role is slightly less, but both Robert Pattinson and Kristen Stewart seem like very progressive,
yeah,
at least from what I've seen and read, fairly progressive young people. And they probably, it's one of the things you get into the Twilight series, you don't really, if they have only read the first book or,
right, you read the first book and you're like, yeah,
it's a vampire drama. And then by the 4th book, we're doing an anti-abortion allegory. Yeah. And it's that had to go to a place that they were just this is not what I thought I was signing up for. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the wedding scene in part 1 was the very last scene that the cast and crew shot. It was also shot under tight security. They had a helicopter above the set. Off-duty police officers surrounded the location, and then they used sheets and umbrellas to protect the set from errant photographers trying to snap shots of what was going on. Supposedly, Kristen Stewart said Taylor Lautner was in tears when the cast watched the unfinished cut. Now, you can decide for yourself. That was the only thing I found. You can decide for yourself what those tears were for and why. This is the first one since Twilight that Jackson Rathbone, who plays Jasper, had his own hair rather than a wig. He had a wig which I believe, I could be wrong about this, was probably because I believe in 2010 He was in
Was that when he was
The
in
Last
Avatar?
Airbender.
Oh my God.
He was in The Last Airbender as Sokka, and he had shaved his
He had
his
the
head.
side
He had the
shave.
side shave, and so I bet for the middle two, that's why
Oh my God.
he had a wig. Anyways,
Yeah, probably.
if I might be wrong on those timelines, but I think The Last Airbender movie was 2010, so that would line up. Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times gave the film 2.5 stars out of 4, which isn't bad, saying that it is filled with a lot of unanswered questions, but he called Kristen Stewart's portrayal of Bella pretty good. Which I've said the whole time. She does pretty good. Writing for Rolling Stone, Peter Travers said Breaking Dawn Part 1 is, quote, the worst Twilight movie yet, and thought Taylor DeLautner looked like a, quote, petulant 5-year-old.
I mean, that
Which reading the book
nails
so far,
Jacob.
he nailed it. Gabriel Chong of Movie Exclusive gave the film 4 stars out of a possible 5. I had to include a positive review here. In the hands of a lesser director, the turn of events could very well descend into farce. Thankfully, then, this movie has found a masterful helmsman in Condon. So that's a good review that I was able to find. Finally, Breaking Dawn Part 1 was nominated for 8 Razzie Awards. So there you go. That's it for the movie facts. Where can you watch this movie? You can, as always, check your local library. Support your local library. Get their circulation numbers up. If you can't get it from your local library, in the U.S., it is now on Hulu. It has been moving around on us.
It's moved
around all over the place.
We had a conversation about this the other night.
It was on Amazon Prime for a while.
Yeah.
For at least a very brief time.
We watched the clips on Amazon Prime.
We watched the clips on Amazon Prime, but as of August 31st, it moved off Amazon Prime and it is now on Hulu in the US. Also, if you have Amazon Prime, you could still watch it there, but it is through IMDb TV, which is the same thing that happened with Dolan's Cadillac, where you can watch it on IMDb through their website, or if you sign in, or you can watch it through Amazon Prime, but it links to the IMDb TV where you have to watch it with ads. So that's another option. You can also watch it on, if you have a Roku, the Roku channel has it. We get the ads for it on our Roku all the time. It's also with ads on there. Or if you have Freeform TV through like cable or satellite or dish or something, which is how we watched the first one, is because we had YouTube TV and we recorded it.
The first one, that's how we watched New Moon. We had to rent it from Amazon Prime.
Right. We rented the Amazon first one.
We had to pay $4 to rent Twilight. I was so mad.
Yes. But the second one we watched through Freeform TV, which is another option. Or finally, you can rent it for $4 on pretty much any other service. So those are all the ways.
The saga of where we watch Twilight has been like
almost as twisty.
Yes, there have been more ups and downs than the actual Twilight saga. It's been in a different place for every single movie.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So yeah, those are all the places you can watch it. I'm excited to finally wrap this thing up and see how it all ends, because I don't know. Boy, I'm like I said, I'm a couple 100 pages in so far.
I am excited to put this reread behind me.
Yes. It's been interesting. It's been fun. I have enjoyed it overall. It's been a fun time, and the discussions have been fun. But yeah, I'm definitely ready to not be reading 800 pages of Stephenie Meyer's writing every week or every couple weeks. So that's gonna do it for this prequel episode. Until next time, guys, gals, non-binary, everybody else,
Keep reading books.
watching movies.
Keep being awesome.